It's a kind of a Ponzi scheme-like situation. And then came Xi in COVID and kind of said, you know what, guys, this has gone on for too long. Real estate prices are unsustainable. They are the highest in the world by a mile. Ruins standing there, unfinished buildings, the size of one United States. So about 120 million units of unfinished apartments. If China is in what I would call a balance sheet recession the world has never seen before. It all started with real estate, but the overcapacity in bad debt is not restricted to property only, but that bubble alone is the size and the dimensions and the complexity and the Chinese characteristics that the world has never seen before.
Hi everyone, I'm Maggie Lake, and today I'm talking macro with Alexander Stahel, founder and CIO of Burggraben Holding AG and the author of the Commodity Compass Substack. Hi Alex, it's great to have you on.
Hi Maggie, thanks for having me.
So we've been going back and forth because you put out an extensive report on China, which is so incredibly timely given the rising geopolitical tensions, the fractures we see, talk of trade war. And so it's really important, I think, to understand where China is. And I want to read a couple of lines from the piece that really kind of knocked me on the floor. And I'm quoting here: most Western observers, investors, and industrialists do not fully appreciate their interdependence and the seismic structural changes that are unfolding in China today. What has worked for the past 2 decades is no more. China has changed. Ignore it at your own peril. Those are some pretty strong words. What do you see that worries you in terms of the perception of China? Just sort of big picture, and then we'll drill down on some of what you lay out in the report.
My perception is that your average investor, let alone your average industrialist, got used to a China that is actually embracing trade and call it a form of free market, which they don't have, and people know that. But it got freer over a period of, let's say, 30 years, from the 1990s to more or less 2012, and then there was still some left, but it got less and less in terms of freedom. The way Xi Jinping thinks. And I would argue that people have not fully yet accepted what Xi Jinping is all about, and that he is no Deng, he's no Zemin, he's not like his predecessor Xi Jinping, but he is really about taking China, what I would say, domestically, to the Leninist left. So that means the Leninist structure that the CCP has in place is actually getting tougher and tougher in terms of freedom for the people. I think it takes China to the Marxist left, which refers to the local economy. So he wants more state, not less. While they control a lot in their economy, much more than we do in the West, he wants to control even more. And he even, for those that pay attention, put a due date on his economy for when he thinks he has to kind of renationalize the entire thing. And he said it publicly in his public addresses internally, and the due date is 2035. And then probably the most concerning for Westerners should be that he takes China to the nationalist right, meaning his agenda is not to necessarily have a more prosperous China, but to have a more powerful China. And powerful in terms of international, call it strongman, from a strongman perspective, which is timely, as you know, because we obviously have these geopolitical tectonic shifts going on. And so I think that's important for people to accept. I think there was a kind of wishful thinking about, China is now so successful economically that they embrace more and more free market, but they don't, or not under Xi. And it's not just, before Xi, there was what I would say, the CCP controlled China and everything about it. There was what I would say or at least the way I understand it, and I read carefully about it, there was kind of an party kind of checks and balance between different fractions within the CCP. That is all gone under Xi Jinping. So he wants to be the dictator. And
that would mark a very different China, because you're right there, as we speak, the perception that Chinese equities might be undervalued. They've been overperforming, so that it's a place that you can put money in. Okay, there's some political, ideological differences, but there's a growing middle class that we want to get our products in front of. That, yes, there are geopolitical tensions, but they'll come back to the negotiating table. You might have to use a stick, but there'll be a way that we all play again in global trade. It'll just rebalance, a necessary rebalancing. There's a lot of assumptions based on the way that China used to operate, and you see just a very different path forward. Let's start with the Chinese economy, since that's sort of at the base of it. So there's a political change, and then maybe an economy that's driving some of this. Well, you'll tell me. Where is where is the Chinese economy right now? What is the state of the Chinese economy? Is it healing? Is China coming to the world stage from a place of economic strength?
So I'm clearly in the camp that China's hurting. Now we have to be very careful when I start with that, and we'll have plenty of time to explain and to your audience why I think it's hurting and why it's real. But before I say that, whatever is hurting, that doesn't mean China has incredibly powerful aspects in its economy. So they are clearly the manufacturing hub of the world, while Europe and Japan and South Korea are too. China is in terms of size uncomparable to the rest of them. So it has a incredibly vibrant technology side, although it copied a lot of it from the Americans and partly from other Asian or European countries. But it has it, and it's very CCP guided. So whoever is successful or whatever they want to push gets the cheap funding and gets the full attention of the CCP, but for the nationalist reason, not for the free trade reason under Deng, where more or less the belief was it doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. That's over. It absolutely matters what color the cat is, and that you are actually falling in line with the party line as an entrepreneur, which we saw all these fallouts in the past. Certainly since COVID. The clampdown on tech and Jack Ma was obviously the most famous story in that regard. But so China's economy, in my view, overall is hurting. It has too much debt, and its investment-led growth model has come to an end. It doesn't produce any meaningful ROI anymore. So the return on all this money poured into infrastructure and real estate has come to an end. Now, Xi, to his credit, has recognized that and has therefore stopped that kind of funding. But that brings us later to the next problem they have. But so right now, he selected a few industries that he wants to support, and those we shouldn't underestimate. Now, before we go to the next topic, there is something that this investment-led growth model has done systematically across all the sectors, not just those that we're going to drill down on, and that is it has led to overcapacities. The overcapacity they kind of believe, so as long as everyone competes with each other, we at some point get the best product out, which they do. If you look at the car industry, BYD has now become a very powerful company, the company that Warren Buffett invested early. Now, but the overcapacities means that they cannot make money, or the entire industry not. And so there is a lot of good money after bad going on in this investment-led growth model, and it leads to a lot of bad debt that yet people, I think, have to fully understand what it all means. And to me, I feel very uncomfortable with that, because it tells me at some point something big will happen there, because they will have to make decisions, because they cannot fund everything anymore as they used to. At some point, I think the trust in Chinese debt will break down, and we'll get to that later, because I think it's important to really slice the debt carefully, because they have a way to make the pig look much better than it is. So that's that. But again, China has very, very competitive sectors, and those will not go away for the time being.
So that is, it almost sounds like you're talking about in other small pockets, it's that sort of zombie effect, right? You've got some really, really outstanding companies where they've poured the money in, but because of the nature of it, there is not sort of judgment on the capital. It's just thrown around. So you get malinvestment, and you get a lot of bad debts. You get zombie companies that are propped up. There's been no reckoning for the misallocation of capital. You've produced some success stories, but there's also a lot of collateral damage to that it hasn't been marked to market, so to speak.
It's just a very inefficient story where, like in the Soviet Union, they had pockets of strength. They went to the moon, and they had a lot of good tech. They knew how to do nuclear. So they were, good mathematicians. They knew how to do things, and yet the economy collapsed completely at the end of the 80s. And I think in China, they call it a better Soviet model, a much more efficient one. And, don't underestimate the Chinese. And they have a lot of virtues collectively. But at the same time, the direction the CCP is taking this leads to a constant misallocation of capital. And that is now going on since the thing started in 1978. So, it wasn't there wasn't this vibrant market then, but certainly in the 90s it took off, and since then we have, I would say, systematic misallocation of capital for 30 years, and that created a lot of bad debt on the other side. So they have an upside down balance sheet.
So so how does real estate fit into this? Because I think what we are more aware of internationally is the real estate bubble. There was a lot of attention on the overcapacity, the malinvestment in that sector. There has been a thought, there's not a lot of transparency, so it's very difficult, but a thought that they've been trying to systematically burst that bubble. Are they making progress? Is that still an issue? What do we need to understand about the real estate market in China?
My recommendation is for everyone to really do understand it, and not just read a casual article about it, because there are so many disturbing parts about the real estate sector. So for a starter, the Chinese household has about 70% of its wealth tied up in property.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And the reason is there was no alternative, right? The stock market wasn't exactly a success in the last 10 years or even before that, which, by the way, is one indicator that tells you a lot about the Chinese, call it company model, that doesn't produce earnings. It produces over capacities. But but at the same time, everyone wanted a house, and it's kind of easy to understand for the average Chinese, and everyone needed to coat up. And then there was also this, bringing people, about 600 people from the rural to the urban era. And so there was an incredible property boom the world has never seen before, anything like it. And the problem about that is, in order to appreciate what went on there, is, first of all, the Chinese didn't own property or the land of the property. They have a concession on it. So that has a deadline, and so when someone buys a piece of property, someone has to first, that was usually the developer, go to the local government and get a concession for a piece of land. So that became an important source of income for local governments. And that created an incentive for them to sell that land, and in turn for the developer to bring on these properties. And then
that's important. Would we think of that as almost like a very expensive permitting? Like you buy a transfer of money to local government to pay for a permit to build before it's even
it's
there.
a concession for 40 years. And by the way, it also creates a type real estate. It's a little different if you buy something for yourself or build something for yourself, which you're going to own forever and then pass on to your children. While here you kind of, you think you may own that forever, but you're not quite sure. And then the property quality is actually not quite to the standards that we will probably be used here in the West. Anyway, so that's one aspect. The second is, which is completely different now, and I again think few people appreciate it, is that you have to come up with the payment for that property upfront. So you buy off plan, as we say as the English would say. I'm not quite sure your American audience would say the same, but you have to come up. Let's say that the property costs you $100,000. You have to come up with the price on day one. Otherwise, you're not in the business. And now that the developer already owns your 100,000, and he gives you, of course, in return a contract and promise, and says, look, I'm going to take up this property in 2, maybe 3 years. You can go to the bank after that and take on a loan. And there are qualifications for that and different leverage on it. But let's say on average, the Chinese took up about 30% mortgage to pay the 100,000. So now that's all fine. And the developer now sold an apartment building, and let's say it's 80% sold. So he goes about it in the 90s and 2000s, and will build that property, and then you get whatever you receive, and you have to deal with it. And if that's not exactly to specification, there is not that much anymore you can do. While on our side, we would probably pay a third first, and then another third, as the progress is documented, and then at the handover we pay the final bit.
Right,
and
that's
if
why
we
we
are
have
not
a
happy
walkthrough
about the package, then we would say, hold on a moment, please fix this, and this.
And there's recourse. We do
there
a
is recourse,
walkthrough, right?
And there is law, and then and so on. And by the way, the money has to be used for building your property, right? Here, that's all theoretically true, but it just doesn't work that way. So now we get to the tricky part, which I think people, and instead of just throwing around numbers and how big this is, let's just talk about the principal way the property works in China. What happened then is that many developers actually said, you know what, I'm going to take care of building that property, but before I do that, I actually use that money that I just received from all my future clients, and I actually buy more land. I buy the next concession. So in China, and this hasn't started that way, but it became more and more the norm, not the exception. And so what has happened is actually kind of a Ponzi scheme where the money wasn't around anymore to build the property. So how did the developers in the beginning solve it? Well, they went to the bank and took on extra debt to then build that property, but the money that they received, they call it the free loan from the owners, they have already used for the next land concession. So then your audience may ask you, but hold on, isn't that money going on an escrow account? And shouldn't everyone then, the fiduciary duty of the banker and everyone involved in the chain of events is that even legal? And the answer is no, it's not. But there is also no law that defines what happens if you do it wrongly. While the incentives along the value chain is actually quite upside down, because the governor of a city, let's call Beijing, has actually an incentive to sell to the developer the next piece of concession, because that's how he finances his household, his local government household. And in fact, over time, 35% of expenses was funded from the sale of land concessions.
Mm.
So now everyone says, okay, so far so good. What's the problem? Well, the problem is if so that kind of creates misincentives, and everything is kind of always fine as long as everything is worth more, and this chain of events continues to go. It's a kind of a Ponzi scheme-like situation. And then came Xi in COVID and kind of said, you know what, guys, this has gone on for too long. Real estate prices are unsustainable. They are the highest in the world by a mile, by a country mile. Like no American will pay even close to these prices in New York City, and they wouldn't engage, right? And so it's completely overvalued in terms of price per income. So Xi rightly says, okay, stop, guys, we need to stop it. And he introduced these 3 red lines, which then meant that developers had to deleverage, which then meant they didn't have money, so they couldn't complete the buildings. So now you say, okay, I mean, let's bail them out and let's fix this. But the problem is the size of the problem, right? So now we have about the size of one United States that is unfinished, uncompleted.
Ghost cities.
And when I say uncompleted, I don't mean it's kind of it almost finished and people haven't
not
moved
even a shovel in the ground.
Call it the ghost cities. I mean ruins standing there, unfinished buildings, the size of one United States. So about 120 million units of unfinished apartments.
So let me ask you, so the idea, what you just laid out, that sort of giant Ponzi scheme and the scale of it, you can understand, or it should sort of put to rest theories that they've been working through it, because that's the theory, that they've been working through it.
Now, there is absolutely, let me just say there is absolutely no way they're going to work through that. So according to the IMF, it eats up about 5 to 6% of GDP per year for about 10 years.
Wow, that's a big number.
So that's not going to happen, right? And everyone who says even close to something, they haven't done the work properly, because the size of the problem is unsolvable for China. Unsolvable. Sorry.
Can they, since they are such a centrally controlled government, can they just extend and pretend forever?
Well, that's what they do a little bit now, but what it all comes down to is actually that they just put the burden on the people that paid up front for this apartment, partly with a loan that they partly, by the way, now have to service. If they don't, their credit system goes down and they cannot even use the local tram or bus anymore, because your credit score gives you a life or not. So that they are kind of forced. They were, they came freely to the party, but they didn't understand that buying an apartment in China since about 2015 is actually a lottery ticket on completion. In COVID, that lottery ticket, call it probability of being finished, collapsed. Mm-hmm. Now people don't get handed over their property for years already, years and years and years. Now they start to protest, call them mortgage protests and so on. If they do that, their credit score goes down. And so people are cornered. And because
we don't have to worry about social unrest because it's not possible.
Well, let's be careful there. I don't know exactly how that works out. I think if anything has the potential for large-scale social unrest, then it would be this property problem of 120 units not completed, so call it 120 families waiting. And then some of that are obviously second homes and third homes. Then so people maybe are less tense about it, but there are lots that would like to move in. It's something that they already paid and that now don't have money and have to pay the mortgage. And if they don't pay the mortgage, they have a problem, that their life is more or less ruined. And so that's a large scale problem in China now, without a doubt.
So it's interesting because if that's the reality check on the Chinese economy, and I think it's really important that you laid it out in the way that you did, which is don't underestimate the things that are powerful and good. It's just that there is this enormous anchor underneath that, which is holding the economy back. And I mean, it could also be a time bomb, however you want to think about it, that is deep in the economy. Am I right to think that will drive a lot of the decisions that Xi makes, having to deal with this unresolvable economic weight? They've got to figure out a way to move past that. Is that sort of, should we assume that will dictate economic choices made?
Has to, because every single day they are faced with bills for teachers and policemen and nurses and teachers and whatever, that the local governments have to pay, and they cannot pay because the 36% that we mentioned, that is financed from the sale of new concessions, has obviously collapsed. And because people now are waiting for their homes and everyone is insecure, prices start to come lower and lower. So everyone is, there are no new customers, or much less than before. Therefore, there is less income on local government sides. Therefore, Xi has to bail out local governments more and more. So yes, as you formulated, every day, that is a problem for the central government of Xi Jinping, because he has to bail the local governments out.
So what does he do to plug that hole?
So he taps the last, call it, clean balance sheet China has, and that's the central government balance sheet, which has about 40% debt to GDP. And so he uses up more and more of that, call it, last bit of goodwill that is out there, and issues more debt.
So you just made it. You just called it the clean balance sheet. So is the suggestion that all of many of the dangerous liabilities facing China are off the balance sheet? So if you're an investor looking at their debt levels or their trade surplus, you're not seeing actually some of these liabilities. Is that right?
Correct. Also, that one is more complicated than in most other countries it would be. So let me open that slide, because I don't know all the numbers by heart. But according to our calculation, let me find that slide. So if an investor looks at, call it, the Bloomberg numbers, he will probably look at the government debt and the central government debt outstanding in 2023. 2023 would be about 29%, according to Bloomberg, debt to GDP. Then he would at some point think, well, maybe what about the local government? Isn't that connected to the central government, or is that completely separate? No, they're not completely separate. They're actually one unit, because the central government tells them exactly what to do and not to do. So you add that and you get to another 40%. And then we come to your very smart question, which and is there something off balance sheet? And that is what they call the local government finance vehicles, which the local governments created because for a long time they were not allowed to do that. And so they had to find a workaround to plug some of their holes already back in the days when they even had a lot of income from concession sales. Because in their unitary tax system, the local governments carry about 80% of the expenses, but only get about 40% of the income. So there is a constant mismatch of expense and income in the Chinese tax system, while the central government is actually exactly the other way around. So it's the CCP way of controlling everyone. There are many controls, but that's one of them. So these LGFVs, those local government finance vehicles, by now, and that's where it gets very hard to get the data right. So the Bloomberg couldn't give you just the data there, so you have to go to IMF, or you have to have different data terminals. The local Chinese one we cannot access anymore. But that's about 66% according to the IMF in 2023, or debt to GDP on top. And then actually you have to be more careful, because basically everything that we consider the economy is actually to a large part also state controlled. So there are these state-owned enterprises. And if you only add the policy banks there, so those are the 4 largest banks that are clearly every day executing on the command of the CCP. If you only add that, then you add another 28%. So you're now already at 163% debt to GDP. In an emerging market with a fraction of the income per capita of the United States. So if you compare them to other emerging markets, such as India, which is maybe a little unfair because India is clearly behind them in terms of the development curve, but if you compare them to Brazil or Mexico or any of the G20 emerging markets, you'll see that they are completely out of line in terms of debt level. China is. And when I say the last of clean balance sheet, that's the central government, which most people then stop to look at the debt and say, well, everything is fine because it's only 29%. What's the problem? They have a lot of debt capacity. Well, they don't. And again, what I just said explained now, and Maggie, we have a slide for that on page 100, which I think helps your audience to digest what I just explained. That's again just me adjusting for all these things and then giving them a lot of goodwill about all the other, call it the other debt pile, which is corporate bonds and, entrusted loans and trust loans and whatever. And then if you dig into those, you find out there are lots of government guarantees in those as well. That's why people buy into them. So it's kind of, call it the junk market of the United States, before the Lehman crisis.
But everything's backstopped by the state.
Or directly or indirectly guaranteed through the state, and so there is a lot of risk involved. Now, maybe the local government says, you know what, you didn't read the fine print, sorry, we're not backstopping anything. But then again, it means that you are actually screwing the Chinese population or investors, which then again means they are not spending.
Right. So there goes your consumption model of growth.
The next article where they say, by the way, here comes the next package. First of all, I look exactly what they are doing in this package, because usually it's just a redistribution of bailing out or like refinancing bad debt from the past, right? Or just new financing for local governments that cannot pay the bills and don't pay, the salaries of the teachers right now. Mm. And then if you go a step further, you actually find out that, there is so much bailout to do and much they don't do. And then those people cannot consume. And that's why we call China is in what we call a balance sheet recession, which this amazing author, Richard Cow from ex-Nomura, a Japanese economist, created for Japan in the late 1980s, where more or less the real estate crisis took 15 to 20 years of extra government spending to get them back out of this balance sheet recession, which he defines, that has nothing to do so much with what is happening on the balance sheet itself, but it happens in the minds of people or of corporates, where all of them say, you know what? I need to deleverage. I need to get rid of my debt. I need to pay back my debt. I have to save more in order to do so I can spend less in the economy, and therefore you are in a, what I will call a deflationary spiral. And
Yes.
that, if there was ever one, China is in it now. And it's the mother of all of them, because in terms of whatever aspect you take, if you really do a macro view instead of just cherry picking BYD or one strength of pocket here and there and say, by the way, they know how to do drones and they know how to do batteries better and cheaper than everyone else. I say, okay, should we look at everything, or should we just, applaud the best, because they're not going to bail out anything, right? The best. I mean, they're going to be around for a long time to come, and they're going to be competitive. But if you look at it from a holistic macroeconomic perspective, China is in what I would call a balance sheet recession the world has never seen before. It all started with real estate, but the overcapacity in bad debt is not restricted to property only, but that bubble alone, the property issue alone, is the size and the dimensions and the complexity and the Chinese characteristics that the world has never seen before. All that wrapped up in a Leninist structure, which more or less every single day puts more and more pressure on the people of China. And so it's a pressure cooker. It's really a difficult situation, and ignore it at your own peril. What I'm trying to say is, when China was this locomotive of the world, and let's say the world grew, let's say on average by 2 to 3% for the last 30 years, and of that 70% was China, of that additional growth of GDP in globally, I would argue it's now the other way around for another 30 years. So it's the end. It's dragging the global economy down for years to come. In it, if there is a quarter or two where it isn't the case, people shouldn't get cheerful about it. It's real. China has to digest something which is very hard to digest. Just macroeconomically, if you put the best Goldman Sachs bankers and whoever around the world on a table, it's very hard to solve.
Does this make China more dangerous, or does this make China more willing to come to the table because they're going to need some sort of partners or innovation or relationship with the global economy if they're going to steer out of this?
That's the 1 billion question. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to sound dramatic for your audience, because A, I don't know, and B, we will have to see. But in the start of this conversation, I explained that Xi, from a foreign policy perspective, took China to the nationalist right. So he wants to reunite everything that he considers Chinese. And I don't think it stops there. Then what I will put into the mix in order to kind of find out together, I would say, so now we have a dictator that has strong feelings about, Chinese pride, and rectifying some of the historic dramas the Chinese had to go through. So he has strong nationalistic feelings, and he mentions them in every single speech. So he considers it the Chinese dream and his historic task to reunite everything that is Chinese, and we get to that in a moment, because your audience already knows where this is going. So we have that aspect. Then we have, call it, a lot of pressure for the average Chinese on the daily job, if they even find a job. There is a huge unemployment on the youth side. It's very similar to Spain, by the way, in that regard, in the 90s and 2000s. So it's hard to find a job, so everyone needs to keep busy. And then you have this investment-led growth model, which I would chip in as another component, which leads to this constant overcapacity. So what do you do there? Right? They more or less can build 70% of all the ships in the world, and all the batteries and all this and that. And probably on the defense side, they build a lot too. I'm not an expert for Chinese, for the Chinese defense industry, but I certainly pay attention to it. Then maybe the last component is that we have all this debt and what to do there, and how is there a debt jubilee to come, and how can you even digest that, and what does it do to the Chinese economy? And then the last part is all these exports, which is kind of the last wealth they have in order to keep these overcapacity, in order to get some profit out of these overcapacities instead of being loss-making. Whatever it is what you produce, right? You really need that market because the Chinese don't consume. And now comes Trump and says, by the way, guys, tariffs. And we have to rebalance, and we have a huge deficit versus you, and you are actually the worst offender. It's not just Mexico, and it's, by the way, Mexico is partly also because of Chinese subsidiaries. So it's kind of China in disguise, and so is Vietnam and other places where they obviously, kind of diversify the risk versus a China-US confrontation. But at the end of the day, Trump and his administration will figure all of that out too, and he wants to rebalance. So this is a risky, I call it toxic soup that we are cooking at the moment. And I think the audience has to judge for themselves where this is going. I mean, what we do know is that Xi wants to reintegrate Taiwan, and he makes absolutely no secret about it. Now, the question is, does he want to do it peacefully, or does he want to do it in other means? And I think they are very clever in achieving, peaceful integration too. Right? I think, my friend Michael Coe could tell you much more about the local politics of Taiwan and the factions there. Some of them are actually in support of an integration, others are not, and so on. So I think there are many, they play many songs on the piano, and so we have to see how it all plays out. But what is clear is that I think only Xi knows what he's going to do next. But I think it's actio and reactio, right? So he's not acting in a vacuum. It comes down to what is happening around him.
What does this mean for commodities, the space that you follow so closely?
Well, the main reason we did all this work, which took us months and months to get it right, because we couldn't believe our numbers too. We were too casual about it for much too long, and we didn't appreciate the full problem of the real estate bubble at all a year ago now. I was obviously aware of it, but at some point I said, look, I have to stop reading all these things and looking at all these numbers. I really have to do it holistically. And so I figured all that out and did that report for us. And then we went from one to the next. But the point is, when China was this locomotive for all commodities, oil, more oil. We need more oil imports. We need more copper imports. We need more iron ore imports, right? We need everything more. I would say the incremental demand that China created for the world, I would say for at least 20 years, it was somewhere between 50 and 80%. Again, they created all this demand. Now, commodities adapt, and then the supply side reacts, and then it's not, and so there are mismatches, and then we had bulls and we had less bulls, and we had bears in between. But in general, China created a lot of additional demand consistently for 25 years, and I think that's over. And I think probably the most misunderstood part of that, I was very loud on oil for a while now, that to be careful there, also because of their shifting policies in terms of, call it geopolitical independence, and that they want to be less reliant on oil. But I think the key commodity that is misunderstood is copper. Everyone thinks there is a copper bull market of monumental proportions around the corner because we have a mismatch of demand and supply over the next 10 years. And I would say people want to dig in there very carefully and review that, because copper, what we just described in the property and construction market, not just the house, but also street, everything, infrastructure. China is 50%. So of the entire copper demand, China is 50%, and then this construction and property sector was about, up to 70. So it's about 35% that sector that is now imploding of copper demand. At the same time, Trump has kissed the Green Deal goodbye. I think Europe has to, because they're going to otherwise deindustrialize themselves. So I'm not sure anything much is coming from here. While maybe politicians are face saving now, I wouldn't put a cent on it that we're going to see much in terms of Green Deal going forward here. So they're going to slowly and carefully rewind it. And so I don't think we have that copper structural bull at all. And if you had asked me the same question 4 years ago, I'd said, yes, we have it, but I'm not convinced anymore. That's one reason I did it, but I think it's bad for oil demand. And then it's less bad for others, right? It's for coal, I don't see weakness coming at all, because they, in fact, build 2 power plants per week on coal. And they need a lot of new electricity despite, because the investment-led growth model or the misallocation of capital, call it, is still in place. Because why? Because it's a Leninist structure, because they have a central target and the economy has to grow 5%, and maybe it only grows at 2%, but they build. And now whether that stuff is used or not doesn't matter, right? They build it anyway. And if they have too much copper smelting capacity, so what, right? The smelters don't make any money, but you build the smelter. Here is the money, do it. It's your target. And so that's how you achieve GDP. But for us, I mean, it's for me, it has nothing to do with GDP. It's just good money off the bat, constantly, all the time.
So this sounds like a bearish outlook for the commodity complex when we're talking about.
Oh, some for sure, right? Iron ore and so on. I have no idea why anyone would be long iron ore. Now, every commodity, as you know, we have to look carefully. You can never make like statements last too long, and always have to look at demand and supply, because commodities, price in the here and now. And if there is suddenly less supply than there is less demand, then you still have a bit of an upswing.
Right, you can have rallies, but it's in a channel that
you can have all sorts of combination. But if you ask the structure of it, and China's so weak as I describe, and I will report this out, people can go and read it. And we took a lot of time and detail to make sure this is data and not feelings. For me, this is just, I cannot even understand why people want to argue with me on it or whatever. It's just forget it.
And of course, this has huge implications for not only commodities, but equities as well, as we've seen people, trying to bottom fish in Chinese equities and looking for value there.
Yeah, right. And I wish them luck. And I if tomorrow Warren Buffett comes out and says, by the way, I sold my BYD stake, which I think is a fantastic company, by the way, right? They're going to grow and they have the capacities and they have an amazing genius founder. And I have all the respect in the world for him and everything he does and the way he does it and so on. So that's a winner, right? They're probably going to be bigger than Toyota in 5 years. I don't know. But if Buffett sells it anyway, then because he pays attention to the Leninist structure, and I wouldn't put a cent down in that market when actually you have a CEO at the helm, which is called Xi Jinping, which has a due date for his entire economy in terms of nationalizing it. And he says it for those that pay attention, and you shouldn't pay attention to me. Read our report and find the sources. Or do the work for yourself and go to the Chinese sources. Don't read the Wall Street Journal now. By the way, Wall Street Journal is very good on it, but you really have to go after these sources. It's not always easy because many things are only in Chinese, but these days with AI and God knows the tool we have, at least we managed. I needed some help from some Chinese friends, for which I'm, by the way, very grateful. So Nick, this is a compliment to you out there. But what I'm saying is I think it's important people look at it in detail, and not just having those past associations about China wants to have more trade and wants to have prosperity and everything is going up. That part is completely old.
Yeah, I think this is so important. And again, as I said, the release, I encourage everyone to read it. It is so important as we not only talk about portfolio allocation and people looking outside the U.S. and looking to China, but at this juncture with all of the geopolitical tensions and the fractures, as we mentioned, and trade war, it's really important to understand where everyone's coming from and the motivations behind that. There's a lot of talk about things just being negotiating tactics, and it's really important that we all sort of educate ourselves and plug in. Alex, I so appreciate you taking the time. It's a fantastic report. People can follow your Substack. We will put a link in the description so that they can find out where to continue to track the conversation and find out more information.
Thanks for having me. This was so kind, and good luck to you, Maggie. I hope we see each other soon again, and thanks for having us.
Absolutely. We will do it. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thank you.